I, 10 feet is, of course, where it's most dramatic, where you're seeing the most parallax. But I'm the space I'm in has windows, and so I can perceive three-dimensional depth for a pretty good distance. Everyone is going to be individual, depends on their eyesight, and some of that is actually driven by what the interocular distance is between your pupils. So everyone's mileage is going to vary, literally.
So, Nick, I have another question for you. So, it said that the little TVs in front of each of your eyes are 4K.
Mm-hmm.
Did I hear that correct?
I believe they said that it's more than 4K for each eye, or
yes,
at least 4K for each
that
eye.
is what I heard. You're right. So more than 4K. So 4K plus 1, whatever the number is. So then does that mean it is equivalent to 2 more than 4K displays next to each other, or is it one 4K display split between my two eyes?
You'll perceive it as a single 4K display.
Okay, but foveated. So the bulk of the well, I'm going to call them, and pardon me, I'm making up terms here. The good pixels will be in the center of my field of view, and then the peripheral will get many less pixels because my eyeball can't focus on that stuff anyway.
Your entire optical nervous system can't really perceive the detail to either side of where your pupil is facing. So if you go from an HD screen, a display on your desk, to a 4K screen on your desk, you've quadrupled the amount of rendering power needed to render to all of those pixels. But the reality is that even though you've got 2 4K displays inside this headset, the rendering effort is actually being delivered just to wherever your eyes are. And that rendering effort can be moved around those 4K displays. All of the pixels
so it watches my eye move to the side, and it goes, "Hey guys, let's render over here now."
Exactly. You can, if you imagined all of the, someone commented to me that you look like a minion wearing one of those things. So just imagine like you
look like you're going to get beat up. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, so the area that's being rendered on that 4K plus display for each eye is actually moving as you move your eyes. It's moving in front of your eyes. So they're using the pixels to give you broader field of view in terms of perceived, peripheral vision, but they're not putting as much effort. It could be a quarter of the effort, and could be even less for that matter.
Could I jump in real quick? Sorry, Nick. We have Alan Hawks just popped in. And Alan, could you do a quick mic check? We're shooting for minus 24 on the WLM meters and the framing.
Sure. How are we sounding? Is this okay?
Just give me a little more.
Well, I took a walk to the park yesterday, and it's really hot outside.
All right. You're coming in around minus 19, so we need you to back off a little bit.
Back off a little bit. How about this? And while I was at the park, it started pouring down rain. And
level down.
Leveled down?
Too hot.
Too hot. How about if I just get a little farther away? I tend to get too close to my mic. How's about that?
The only problem with that approach is unless you're good at it, you generally tend to lean into it anyhow. So,
all right, let me see this.
And Chris, I know we're getting close. Chris, you're just a little bit louder than you should be. So if you turn it down a little bit, that would be great too. Alan, if it's easier for you, we'll stay with that setting. And now we're on standby mode for show.
Got it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about digital production. And our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to be talking about typography. We've got Kelcey Gray here. Here's how this happened. I go to an architectural and design bookstore a couple times a month, and I usually buy a book, and I bought this Let's Make Letters from Kelcey Gray about lettering and fonts and the process of it and what they mean and everything else. And it was just such a great book that I just reached out to her. I said, "You got to come on the show." So she's the author of this book, Let's Make Letters, and it's a really, really good book for getting started with typography. And typography is very, very, very important to what we do. Unfortunately, most people don't think it's very important, and that's why we have so many bad signs and bad everything when it comes to text, because people don't understand that typography is one of the more important things that you need to understand doing what we do. And so we're going to be starting this. This is the beginning of a conversation. We're going to bring more people on to try to solve this problem, because we have a lot of sick people who use bad fonts. So we're gonna try to start to fix this. This is an intervention, is to have someone have a couple experts come in and talk to us about typefaces and typography. So Kelcey Gray is going to be on for the second hour, and I'm just really excited to have her on. So stay tuned for that, and get your questions about lettering and fonts and typography ready. It's going to be a great second hour. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Mitch, what do we have?
Thank you, Alex. First in, Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA, asking, what are methods and best practices to serve files over the internet from a Synology network-attached storage? The goal is to move 40 to 60 gigabyte files to colleagues working remotely.
I think that the only question I would have there, or one of the questions I would have there, is how fast do they need to move it, and what's your connection like at your where you're putting it together. I think that can be, if it's little bits and pieces as needed, and you have a really fat connection, it could work well. Otherwise, it could get pretty challenging. Go ahead, Philippe.
I wanted to not throw this on to myself, but that's exactly.
We were waiting for you. I was like, when I started reading it, when he was reading it, I was like, "Where is Philippe? We need him to jump in."
That's exactly the type of thing that I'm solving, because there are many people that are using Synology drives in their offices, and a lot of times they need to serve files to people remotely, but they don't have the bandwidth. I came in and I put a lot of Synology servers in data centers to become that extra arm on the internet for people to have that. So they connect the Synology to my service, and my service serves to everyone else. So one way of doing that, obviously, Synology themselves, they offer C2 storage, which is more or less. But if you're able to open up the ports to the internet and you're willing to do that, you could serve through Synology Drive or Cloud Station. But there are other ways of doing that, obviously, with services like the one I provide. So if anyone has any questions, can reach out to me anytime, anywhere.
Go ahead, Chris.
The other thing I was going to say is that it's possible, maybe not, it's possible that a better approach would be to ship somebody the data, the 60 gigs on day one, and then hook up using Felipe style work to get little updates. Because as we all know, the best, data delivery system is FedEx, and so at least it's the fastest when it gets to a lot of data. but ship them the beginning of it, and then all the little updates, and there'll be some big files, but that stuff will come online.
And in today's world, 40 to 60 gigs isn't too much data. We've moved terabytes, around at this point. LucidLink is something we've used a lot of in the past for some of the backbone processes. Also, at only 40 to 60 gigs, this is the kind of thing I often use Frame.io for. Just if you're just trying to give somebody something, I want to upload it. I don't want to build a whole server. Now, if you're, and the question really is, are you actively working on it? So do you want to give them access to it in as a Synology that you're constantly adding things and people are downloading things? for transferring and just getting it to people, I use Frame.io almost every day. It's because I can just send them a link. They can give me feedback. They can, do it. And it costs some money. So it's not, but I've got probably, 5 or 6 terabytes up there on active. And then I have a bunch of stuff in archive. And what I will tell you is that when I get a client who asks for something that's 8 months ago, and I still have it on Frame.io, and I send them back a link in 10 minutes, it feels pretty good. You look good. Go ahead, Chris.
Alex, you're about the only person that I will allow to get away with saying only 40 to 60 gigabytes, especially online. And I will tell you this, the online file delivery system that we wrote for our company, we have virtually nearly every production we've done for clients since 2007 immediately available online.
Yeah, it's great. You just keep on adding drives. It's like, is there like a warehouse somewhere that just has the drives? You just keep adding them?
No. And it's not the full res ProRes files. It's not the full res ProRes, but all the deliverable, compressions. Right. And it's astonishing that we can send people links and from stuff from that long ago.
I only promise 30 days, but we often effort to try to keep it for a lot longer than that. And it does make you look really good, especially when another partner can't find it. They're like, oh, we can't find it. So they come to us. We're like, oh, yeah, here's the link. All right, next question.
From Jeffrey Reyes in the Bronx, New York. Are we excited about the 15-inch MacBook Pro Air?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I don't think a lot of people are, but I think they should be. It is a fabulous machine if it comes out like the smaller one that they had before. We are in a kind of an unusual class here at the show because most of us are content creators or do really heavy-duty work. Most of the rest of the world out there doesn't have as much need as we do. But I got one of the small ones, the small MacBook Air M2s for my voice booth, and I have been just utterly impressed with it. The screen is fabulous. It's super portable, super lightweight. And in terms of power and ability, boy, it just blows away anything I've ever had for a general purpose driving computer that'll take care of the needs of probably 80-90% of the market out there. The one thing that I will not survive with that as my primary driver is that it has just 2 USB-C/Thunderbolt ports. And so you're always in the dock world if you want to do anything more robust in terms of connectivity. And particularly in things like what I do here every day, I have all 4 ports and a dock. In fact, I think 2 docks set up. There's just all sorts of I/O that I need because of the work that I do that this doesn't handle. But if I didn't have that, I would go with more of these in a heartbeat. They're great machines.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Looks like a pretty good machine. One reason a lot of people bought the Air was because it was fanless, so it could be used in a situation like Bill's in, where he's in a recording studio, and you have it in front of you, and so you don't have a fan suddenly kicking on in the middle of something if you're doing something that requires a little more oomph. And I'm trying to look at the specs, and they don't say whether the 15-inch has a fan. Previously, if you went up to a MacBook Pro with a 15-inch, or the 15-inch display, the M2s, you'd have a fan, so you could
sit down.
Yeah, I don't. John, you got an open mic. So, I don't think it has a fan. I think that's part of the being the Air. Yeah.
So it does have the higher speed M2, so you think it will throttle down if it gets a little too excited?
Eventually. I mean, I think that for a Pro, the real killer is the fact that you only have two Thunderbolt connections, because one of those is going to be power, and so you really
you only got one left.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. So I think that I don't think that I use, when I'm on the road with an older Intel 14-inch MacBook Pro, I have all the when I'm on air for this show. I know that I'm not fully set up if I look down and one of those slots is open. so I got four slots. There's 4 things going into 4. There's my Ethernet, my power, my camera, and my audio interface.
It has HDMI out too, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't need out. I need in. so it doesn't do any good.
Plug it into your hotel TV.
Yeah. So I don't think that I think for many people who are just doing things more like numbers or Excel or doing a lot of those things, doing basic stuff, I think it's probably great. If you're going to do real work on it, you're going to need a Pro. You need those, and it just comes down to those USB-Cs, or Thunderbolt connections. I think that's the thing that is just and it really, I mean, I think Apple's done a pretty good job of separating the two out and segmenting them. So you're paying more for the Pro, and it has Pro features. I would love to see the Pro actually I would love Apple to make the Pro another, 1/4 inch or at least 1/8 inch thicker, and just give me just a beefy battery, and I think that'd be great. Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, actually, I looked at the 15. I was kind of interested. I actually do most of my production on a 16-inch fully loaded MacBook Pro. And there's this 14, 16-inch debate going on with so many people. I think the 15 is going to hit the right spot for a lot of people. For me, actually, when I went and looked at the specs, I did notice the RAM max out at, I think, 24. And that was a deal breaker. So I don't know if anybody mentioned the RAM.
Yeah, and also long renders. So long renders, it'll throttle. So if you're putting something in, it'll because it will run out of, if you keep it hot all the time, you're going to end up getting to a point where it has to slow down the CPU to not overheat. So that's the other, big challenge there. Next question.
From TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. TJ wants to know the new M-chip Mac Pro maxed out is about $38,000 less than a maxed out Intel-based Mac Pro at $12,000 compared to $50,000. Seems like a deal. It's also $4,000 more than a maxed Mac Studio. Are the extra Thunderbolt ports and PCIe slots worth $4,000?
Go ahead, Philippe.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts on that. It's worth for those that actually need the PCI Express, right? I/O for DeckLinks or a bunch of other things that you can add there. For example, storage. But between the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro, for sure, you're going to experience less noise. The Mac Studio, once it's being loaded, it's going to make noise. It's not a very silent machine, whereas the Mac Pro will be an extremely silent machine. The second thing here is compared to the Intel Mac Pro, the cost, right? The Intel Mac Pro can take up to 1.5 terabytes of RAM, whereas the M-chip Mac Pro can only do 196 gigabytes. So there's still a lot of things to keep in mind when we're comparing those prices and so on. It feels to me that the Intel Mac Pro is still a machine that has a different application, maybe on the side of servers, than the new Mac Pro and Mac Studio. And the other thing is the new Mac Pro probably will spend a lot less electricity than the current Mac Pro. So I would like to have one.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it depends on, kind of work you do. If you're into 3D graphics and a lot of rendering, you really need that Pro. The other thing is the Pro has a new generation PCIe bus in it, which will work well with SSD drives. It'll be much, much faster. It's got some astounding speed to it. And I guess with 8 Thunderbolt ports, that means it has 4 different Thunderbolt lanes in there. It's a lot faster in that regard. But
I think each one's got its own lane. Is that right, Philippe?
Separate lanes? So there's 8 lanes?
That's correct, yeah.
That's astonishingly fast. So if you have all that kind of connectivity needs and you're running a post facility, the Pro's going to win, but the Studio's going to win on price.
Go ahead, Nick. Can't hear you.
Yeah, so all of those ports and the PCIe slots, it's all about connectivity. I mean, you could have a different box with exactly the same chip in terms of 3D rendering, even. The M2 and its GPU cores and all of that, 3D work would essentially be the same if, you're not cooking it all the time, but obviously the larger box gives you a lot more cooling ability, so you can have longer sustained performance and connectivity. I mean, I can remember us using, X-Raids and Mac Pros to ingest, multiple SDI connections worth of HD video back in the, early mid 2000s. And so that's the capabilities that you get with this. I mean, feature film cameras are shooting at 8K, 12K routinely at this point. And generally, they're recording to something that's mounted directly to the camera. But with something like this, you could ingest multiple camera feeds and have that viewed live, processed live for live viewing, live comping, but also over those USB-C connections, also be dumping all of that to multiple drives so that you've got redundancy. And so there's those types of scenarios where connectivity and high data rate is critical. That's where this is going to land in its sweet spot.
Yeah, good, Courtney.
Yeah, for ingest, it'd be cool. I was just wondering if you could put some NVIDIA cards into those slots. If Apple's going to release any drivers,
we're all shaking our head. No,
they have to write the drivers. That's the problem.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
We all know that ship sailed so long ago that we can't even see it anymore.
So I'm wondering what the difference is between that and a Sonnet box for external, access over a Thunderbolt port. What's the difference between the Studio Ultra? Speed, because you're throttled by the Thunderbolt port.
Yeah, the new PCIe lane will be faster, and just convenience. You have a box that has all the things in it. You don't have this collection of. I have lots of the Sonnet boxes, and I would love to put those cards into the computer rather than having this mess of external Sonnet boxes. And you have then you have those 8 lanes of Thunderbolt in addition to the 6 cards that are inside. It definitely changes the structure pretty quickly. Yeah, go Philippe.
And I noticed it does come in a rack mount case too.
Man,
optional.
Those computers, they are ideal for the IT cards because I've seen a lot of productions that they are skipping the camera storage altogether and they're connecting everything to the DIT cards and they are doing the live grade on the DIT cards and so on. And this is being able to ingest 24 streams of 4K 60p. That's quite amazing. And then you just use that Thunderbolt to send to external media and you're recording. It's amazing.
I think that EVS has to start looking over its shoulder. I mean, somebody's going to figure this out. Like the hardware is now fully capable of outdoing what EVS does. It's just that no one's got the software figured out. But the drive speeds, the processing speeds, everything else could do something pretty miraculous on that box for a fraction of the cost.
And
networking speeds.
Yeah, I mean, when we're doing virtual production here, we have a 5 gigabit network in the studio to it's faster than some of the SSDs connected to us, and so I don't know what the standard Ethernet connector is going to be. Maybe it's going to be a 5 gigabit
10,
connector, but it's 10 is it? Okay, so it's already there, but eventually there's going to be something faster than that, and you'll be able to just drop it in as a PCI card.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
And because the GPU is on chip, you now have 2 extra slots in the PCI slot count to add more cards because you're not going to be adding those Radeon AMD specialty cards.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing I was thinking about this morning while I was thinking about the show is when I saw this question actually was that you could theoretically, with enough bandwidth, if you were given if we were allowed to have the bandwidth from Zoom, you could take theoretically in a pretty straightforward way a solid 48 1080p outputs from Zoom. You can just basically saturate the reflector. That may seem crazy, except delivering something like back to Unreal Engine or something like that. So you take all the people that are in a meeting and then able to project them on cards at full resolution is kind of interesting, for virtual events and so on and so forth. So that we're going to see a lot of, I think, pretty interesting things as we go forward with these boxes. I also think that for rendering, I think they're going to be pretty interesting. As render nodes, the RAM can be a little low for some things. I have some projects that I've worked on that will max out at 192, at 192 gigs of RAM. But those are mostly photogrammetry programs, not so much rendering, but photogrammetry systems. Next question.
I have a question, and it probably relates to one we just answered. How would the high-end Mac Studio compare to the entry-level Mac Pro?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I think they're pretty close. If the Ultra which is the 2-chip version, the two of their M2 chips married together, 2 Max chips married together, I think. So the highest end of the studio would be basically what the Mac Pro is, except for the expansion ports on it. Comes with the same memory limitations, I think, as the 2-chip version of the other one. But I think it's pretty much the same in a nice case with a little better airflow.
Yeah, I think that you might get a little bit more performance out of the studio that's maxed out than the entry level Mac Pro, but you'd have all that connectivity, and I think that would, it just depends on what you need, for that to work. And space. I have a Mac Studio right here next to me, and it's just sitting on my desktop. I couldn't put the Mac Pro on my desktop. Go ahead, John.
What percentage of the market, Alex, do we think needs that extra I/O? Is it 5%?
At 1%, maybe 0.1%. Like it's a tiny. Here's the thing, though, is that I think it's partially just protecting the ecosystem. It's saying that if you're a high end, because before the Mac Pro, the last Mac Pro came out, even though I didn't buy one, I had it because it still didn't solve some of the problems that I had. I had been planning to exit on the high end the Mac ecosystem because I was like, it's not going to be powerful enough, So I'm gonna have to move to PC or Linux. I had at one point I had like 6 machines that had 4 NVIDIA cards in them, like really, $5,000 NVIDIA cards in each one, to do real-time processing. And I was like, I'm never gonna be able to do that on the Mac. And I could see a future where I wasn't using a Mac for that. That doesn't really affect Apple's bottom line, but it does affect, if professionals start leaving it takes out some of the magic, and so I think that they need to hang on to the professionals, especially when you think about what they're developing for the headsets. One of the problems is they need that whole ecosystem to exist. So they need the ecosystem of I can produce all that content. That what they don't want is all the content for the headset being generated on PCs. That's not good marketing, And so having a piece of hardware that's really designed for that, and they're going to keep on adding to those things, I think is going to make a big difference. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and a lot of what we've been talking about here has been rectangular video, but something that they did show was watching live events in the Vision Pro. And so now we're talking about stereoscopic capture, processing, and streaming. And so this platform is going to be the basis for that. This is going to be the big oil derrick that's at the events, at something like the Olympics. And I think they're gearing up for being able to live stream stereoscopic immersive events.
Which isn't that hard. I mean, I used to do it. I've done a lot of it. It's the camera, and we have to remember that Apple bought Next VR, so they have all the tech in there to do that. I would be blown away if the next WWDC doesn't have a version. They'll have a 2D version, but they'll have a 3D. They'll have a stereo version. Of course, it's recorded, so it doesn't matter. But with the live VR, there's plenty of power inside of the new Mac Pro to put a couple video cards in there, really just one video card, because you're taking, you have to, but what it can, the question there is that if you had, let's say, an 8 camera, it depends on how you do it, but a couple fisheyes, that are rolling into one Blackmagic card, you have 2 of those, and then you have it stitching in real time and then putting them into both eyes and then streaming it all out. And that is a very doable thing inside of this Mac Pro. So I do agree with you that we'll see more live coverage with that, and it'll just be a kind of a CCU for those camera systems. And Apple may even partner with someone, or again, they bought a company that built the camera systems, or the process. So we'll see how that turns out. Next question. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say the last time I was really interested in Mac Pro was because it was the only machine capable of doing that for certain cameras.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, absolutely. A quick reminder, by the way, that we have a ton of questions. You can add a couple questions here, but what I would highly recommend is going and looking at the questions and voting on those questions to make sure you get the order that you'd like. I think we have probably enough to get us through the rest of the hour, the first hour. Questions are also stacking up for Kelcey Gray for typography. So if you have questions about typefaces and typography, go ahead and throw those in right now, and make sure again to vote on these questions to make sure we get them in the right order. All right, next question.
Chris Fenwick, Emeryville, California, asks, I'm sure we all agree, but the most interesting bit of hardware shown yesterday at WWDC was that amazingly engineered and styled iPhone stand in front of the TV. Any clue what that was?
Go ahead, Courtney.
It turns your $1,200 phone into a $98 clock radio, basically. I mean, it's not anything different than what this Otter charging stand is for $32.99. I don't know what the price of the Apple one was, but
more. Bill?
More than $32.99.
Yeah, $49.99. I think we all decided it's $49.99.
I went even cheaper than that. This is mine, and it is this guy, and it's all of $11.99. I will say, I use this more than I can possibly imagine. I put my phone next to my computer and often do comms or something like that for the show on it.
Which one is cool. What is that? What do you?
This is here. I'll let me pop it back up. This is the Liston cell phone stand. It's $11.99. It works well.
Oh.
You can determine how high. You know, it's not super adjustable.
It doesn't
but it
charge
works.
it though.
it doesn't have a MagSafe charger.
This
on
is
it.
just a simple. Put my phone next to me. I plug it in using the lightning connector on the bottom while I'm doing the show, and it's another screen for looking stuff up.
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead, John.
We think that this iPhone stand has a motor in it, so it's able to
Track you.
yeah.
For Go ahead, Chris.
So, I obviously this is a miniature jab at the goggles, but the thing about the phone that they used in front of the TV, the stand that they used in front of the TV, is it was vertical. So, like for example, Bill, I don't think you could set yours up with the phone perfectly vertical. It'll fall over backwards. It's great if you want it to like show up at your face at your desk. But that phone was perfectly vertical, shooting out into the room with the good camera shooting out into the room.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I
As
mean,
a
I
camera
just think it's
mount
funny
as
that
opposed to-
Apple can put out a thing where we're all looking at something they're not even talking about and going, how can I overpay for that too? Go ahead, Philippe.
Well, one thing that I tested today, because I installed the beta on the Apple TV as well, if you have one of those Belkin MagSafe thing that you put on your MacBook for the iPhone, that will work on your TV as well, depending on how thick your TV is. I have an LG C10, and it worked really well on top of it. And I did a FaceTime call to my mom today, and I think FaceTime on the Apple TV on a 65-inch TV or Zoom or so on can be interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
For what you are looking for, you might want to consider this. I have one of these actually mounted on the door of my voice booth inside, and this does go flat. So I've screwed it into the wood of the door, and when I have my IPS panel, when I want to put the second monitor in there, I can slip it in this, and it will stay entirely vertical. So there are ways. Again, it's not a charging stand, but if you're just looking to mount the phone there, these kind of things can work.
I think we're just talking about there's some serious design that got put into that little holder. We don't know if it's real or not, but I bet you there were a lot of meetings. That's all I'm saying. I bet you there's a lot of meetings involved with that stand. Next question.
Next one in from Jeffrey Reyes in Bronx, New York. Gaming seems to be a big key for the Vision Pro as Apple pushed gaming in the keynote. Since Unreal is the preferred engine for AAA games and film and TV, should Apple actively work with Unreal in addition to Unity for the best game experience platform?
Go ahead, Nick.
Probably not. So I think there's number one, I don't think it was a big key for the Vision Pro. I think it's important. It's a component of what they intend for the Vision Pro, but it's not the big key for it. Honestly, Apple and Epic are two big companies, both awesome companies, neither of which actually needs the other. So I don't see a motivation yet for them to suddenly resolve their other differences and come together. I don't think that there'll be a blocking of Unreal Engine. So, I mean, the native development platform for the Vision Pro is Xcode, and they're partnering, they're marketing Unity on side because Unity is really, really friendly with Apple and didn't try to sue them for something. So there's a lot of value in marketing Unity and the game world with the Vision Pro, because there are a lot of people who are willing to spend a lot of money on their technology to play games. And there are a lot of people that, Apple knows exactly how many users are on their iPhones and iPads and other devices playing games. So they know exactly how important games are to their overall ecosystem and their services and their sales. So it clearly is important enough to have included in the presentation. And Unity brings to the table a number of users, and many AAA developers use Unity instead of Unreal Engine. So the big deal is they're already developing on that platform where they may not be familiar with Xcode yet. So this gives them an easy on-ramp to delivering content onto the Vision Pro. But really the native development platform is Xcode and Apple's tools for working with 3D and such. So the answer to the question is I don't know that they should, and even more doubtful that they will anytime soon.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and we don't know if the hardware on that thing is up to rendering 2 eyes full of 4K stereo vision with a decent frame rate on your
83
face.
frames a second.
At 83?
Yeah.
I think maybe
it's 83 frames a second.
The thing, we were, a note about that is that
it was a side note that someone said that they said the headset's polling at 12 milliseconds. That's 83 frames a second.
Yeah, that was the spec on the R1 chip is they're able to refresh those screens at 12 milliseconds. The thing to understand about those two more than 4K screens is that they don't have the same kind of rendering demand as two 4K televisions or desktop displays because they're foveated. And that was another function of the R1 chip. And what foveation means is that our eyes really only have sharp resolution exactly where the center of where they're looking at. And so eye tracking is used to focus the rendering effort at the portion of the screen that you're looking at. And the area beyond that in your peripheral vision is going to be updated at perhaps lower resolutions, lower frame rates, a little bit blurred. And your entire optical nervous system is never going to notice. It's just going to know light's coming from there naturally. And it's like, oh yeah, this is great. This is really immersive. But you're not updating, two more than 4K displays every single pixel the way you would with a desktop screen.
And that has been from a bandwidth perspective, that's been a huge challenge for us dealing with 360 for a long time of what do we render? What do you see? Are we loading things in? So on and so forth. And the foveated renderer is going to be a big deal, as we move forward because of the ability to kind of focus the energy on that. I don't think that, I think that the problem is that the Unreal really blew it. Epic really blew this. The problem is there's this whole platform that's about to launch. And Apple, it's not that Apple is going to shut them out. They're just not going to return their calls, And so the thing is that they can expect almost no support from Apple to do that. No special things, no features added, no, nothing's going to be there. They're not going to do anything to help them do that. And they're building up Unity. We almost forgot that Unity existed before the lawsuit. That's the level of mistake that they made here. It's not just that they're not going to be on the Apple platform, which may or may not matter. It's that Unity is going to get marketing from Apple over and over and over again, marketing that was going to Unreal. They had Unreal on every keynote until the lawsuit, and it was just, it's just the level and what, so they thought that to try to get to a future that they're not going to get to, Unreal's not going to get what it wants. Epic's not going to get what it wants out of Apple. They gave up a future in the thing that was in their core competency that they were in a heavy lead. From a tactical perspective, that is about as dumb as you could possibly go, down this path. And they knew where Apple was going when they did the lawsuit because they were part of all that development. It was just insane. It was an insane move. And it just is an insane, show of hubris. That they thought that they could win something that was unwinnable. What they were asking for is unwinnable in the United States, and maybe they can get it done in Europe because they're crazy. But they're not going to get it done in the United States.
The other thing I was going to point out was that for AAA games to target this platform as a delivery, because of the unique interface of the gesture interface and the eyeball interface, they're going to have to completely rewrite the controls of the game for this very tiny, minuscule platform.
I promise that Apple could own this market if they wanted to. Once they finish this up, they could turn this on. And how you do that is you build a You build a dynamic resolution arena game, and you set up big prizes to win, and it'll flush their entire market forward. So the thing is that the problem with games right now is that they're not built for people; they're built for gamers. And what I mean by that is that gamers really want all the little stories and everything else. You could really simplify this much. What we don't have right now is a AAA game that's more like football, like there's a big field, and we're all going to either throw the ball or kick the ball or whatever football you want to do. That doesn't exist as an FPS. And if you built an FPS that worked on everything from the phone all the way through to the headset at different resolutions, and then you use those big Mac Pros to do higher end rendering for broadcast, you'd end up with something. And then you said, "Oh, it's $10 million to win the game." win the game. Everyone's playing, And so the thing is they could light this up like a rocket anytime they wanted to, and it's just a matter of when I don't think the infrastructure's there yet, but they could turn it on and be as big as almost anything else out there pretty quickly. Next question.
Mark Steele at Orlando, Florida asks, as the Vision Pro will be used in iris scanning for user authentication, I wonder if it will be limited to a single user the same way iPhones and iPads are. This would make it a non-starter for families.
Go ahead, Bill.
I don't think so for these reasons. In the show, they showed a couple of things that surprised me, one of which, I guess, for the people who were testing it out at Apple Park, they actually had an ophthalmologist on site, and they were specifically measuring people's vision. They were creating lenses, or probably picking them in that environment out of a case so that you could customize it for more than one person. So my guess is that that's the way it's going to go. If you have a family and you have different eyesight profiles, there will be these magnetically attached lenses that already exist in the system so that you can recustomize it for individual users. It does mean, though, that in the state that it's sitting on the table, it will be set up optimized for the primary user, and you'll have to go through a few hoops. They said it was taking 15 to 20 minutes for each user who tried it out to go through that process of customization to make the experience as perfect as possible.
Good. Next question.
Vincent Alvarez in Bellingham, Washington asks, is there a technical advantage of connecting 2K monitors to a PC using HDMI versus DisplayPort?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
No, because DisplayPort has more bandwidth, so you could probably get higher resolution and more screens if you wanted to go that way. The downside is DisplayPort is very old. HDMI, on the other hand, is coming on.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, HDMI 2 will always handle 4K and even 8K, so I don't think that'll be a problem with HDMI. And if you say you just got 2K monitors hooked up, it should be fine. The only thing you have to deal with is HDCP, whether or not it's going to support that if you're playing back copyrighted material and you're using that HDMI port for anything other than going to a monitor.
Next question.
Al Trivet in Carmichael, California. Based on what we know about the Apple's keynote presentation, does Vision Pro look like a solid version 1?
Go ahead, Nick.
So absolutely. I do equate this very much with when the iPad was released. I mean, they've done what no other VR technology company has done recently. And keep in mind, VR itself has been around since like 1969, 1968. But they have a complete ecosystem down to the silicon. The operating system has been built for this. The developer tools have been built for this. They didn't compromise in terms of the way they built this. For Apple's vision is about connecting people, whether you're connecting to people to one another, connecting them to what their interests are in life, connecting them to their health, to their work, and they built a device with that in mind, rather than, well, we really like stereo virtual reality. That's pretty cool. And what can we do with this Android chip, this Android operating system, this Snapdragon chip? It separates people from the outside world, but it's still cool. Whereas, Apple really looked at how does someone live their day-to-day lives with this? And they worked from the silicon on out all the way to that second display facing out into the world. The user doesn't use. It's that display is literally for everyone else that's not wearing it. And so I think that they've really put together something that's a paradigm shift. If you go by what Apple's patent lawyers have to say, there's some 5,000 plus new things in this product alone. So yeah, I'd say this is a pretty solid version 1.
You go, John.
I think it's a great first start, version 1. I think version 3 is going to be fantastic.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, as far as version 1 and version 2, I just don't understand the product. It's a solitary product. It's designed for use by one person because it isolates you from everybody else. I mean, think, what can you do in this product that you can't do with something on an iPad, let's say a 12-inch iPad, which costs a lot less. With a 12-inch iPad, you can sit amongst your friends and go, oh, look at this TikTok. Isn't this hilarious? Yeah, with the goggles on, you're going to say, look at the, oh, well, you can't see it. You can't share them with anybody else if you wear glasses because they won't be able to focus their eyes on it either. It's a solitary experience designed for one person and isolates you from everybody except for the people out on the internet. So the people around you.
I think the whole point is that you can't, that they built is that you can talk to people at least at momentarily. I think a lot of us would like to. I mean, I will tell you, in an open office, there's a lot of people that would love to be able to shut everybody out. You basically can create your own office. You put your headphones in, and now you're in your own office, and you don't have to talk to anybody. And that is a huge plus for an open office. It's probably the only fix I've seen so far is to be able to cut everybody out because it's so annoying to have them. It is like. It's just soul sucking to be in an open office, so I think you're going to actually see people using it in that format. But I think also from work from home, I think that you're going to have a lot of folks because you can see what people are doing outside of the headset. I think the problem with the headsets in the past have not been that because there's a lot of people that are quite happy to cut people out. The real problem has been resolution, frame rate, development tools, platforms, and so on and so forth that have really held these headsets back. But cutting the rest of the world out I don't think has actually been. I know that people marketed against that, but there's a lot of people that would prefer to have a little time on their own. And I think that that's not going to be when you're looking at a market at $3,500. They'll sell as many as they can make, because it's not going to be a massive market. It's going to be a couple million. It's not going to be an 80 million unit system. It's going to be a 1 to 2 million a year system, which is still $3 to $7 billion, of revenue. So it's still a good business to be in. But I think that what made it solid is they took the cap off of the price. Generally the number of conversations that you had that we had working on a lot of other things in the past was how do you fit this into a $300 unit or $500 unit or even $1,500 unit? There were so many compromises that were made to do that. And Apple was just like, why don't we not worry about that right now? And they, and let's just, we'll figure out how to get there eventually, but let's go ahead and start building the market now. But I think that, I used to use the Oculus on the plane, and the only reason I stopped taking it was because I kept on breaking it because it was fit into my backpack and everything else. But it was great. You get on a plane, you throw the thing on, and then you don't have to pay attention to anybody for the rest of the flight. Just by itself, it's worth it.
A lot of the questions about how effective this is as a product really do echo the kinds of criticisms the iPad was getting when it was first released. It was underpowered. It's not needed. Why would I use this instead of a laptop? PCs have had tablets before and they failed. But for the same reasons. They were tablets built on a Windows operating system that was not designed for a tablet. And where iOS really stepped up things is they took something that everyone was intuitively familiar with, right? Turning the page of a magazine, and turned that into a incredibly powerful and intuitive interface, mechanism for human machine interaction. And, Apple is uncompromising in that way with this device. One of my biggest pet peeves with consumer VR up to this point is the requirement of these handheld controllers. Like, you get the headset on, you can't see, and you got to fumble around and get the right hand and the left hand in the right spot, and there's a joystick, and they're all like that. And Apple was uncompromising and saying, we're making an interface where you can just wiggle your fingers. And it doesn't matter where you put your fingers. You don't, like Microsoft has done that too with their HoloLens, but your hands have to be in the field of view of the couple of cameras that are in the device. And so, again, I really think that Apple has thought through how this device fits into people's lives.
And the thing is, I'm sitting in my office by myself most of the day. And the thing, and I have 6 monitors around me. I've got stuff all in front of me. There's some point in the future where I could literally have an open desk and just put these things on and just go to work. And I can be, and it's much more, this will be much more like a Minority Report, where I'm going, okay, I need to go over here. I'm going to move over to this. I'm going to take this back over here. I'm going to, place that stuff. And for people, especially, again, work from home, you can have a much bigger system than you would have. I can have a big screen. Oh, I'd like to watch for lunch. I'm going to watch a little bit of Avatar or whatever I want to watch. The thing that I was kind of blown away by when they said, oh, you can take movies too. I'm curious about what they looks like a very square looking movie. But the idea that you could shoot 3D movies from the thing also is super interesting to me, because it's being able to just have that on the headset and go, oh, I'm just going to record that for a minute. I know it'll sound weird, but I think there's a lot of people that are going to be at birthday parties, like just putting it on just when the cake comes out. So they have that little memory of that, and it's not making it up or trying to figure it out. And you can see why they bought NextVR and just in that one little bit of technology. But it's going to be a stereo pair that's recording, and it's something we talked about wanting it on the phone for a long time. Instead, it's going to be on the headset. So, and you can expect this also to be eventually the 3D cameraman. There'll be someone who gets paid. There's going to be a position, I promise you, of people who just get paid to watch. Like you can just sit there and go like this and just watch, just stand there and get the 3D scene. It'll be the cheapest way to do it, because the last time I did that, it was $60,000 a camera. But I think we should, every time Apple releases something that is a new platform, people say that it's dumb and it's not going to work, and that hasn't happened very often. And so I think that it's going to be, so it's they've made pretty good money on almost everything that they launched. Next question.
For the Newton and the Cube
since Steve Jobs came back, everything that Apple releases stuff and they go, wow, that's not going to work.
Cube was after Steve.
The phone, the people said that the phone, Apple doesn't understand phones. They're not going to. There's no way that this is going to work. And Nokia's gone in 2 or 3 years. They were basically irrelevant. The watch is the same thing, where Apple doesn't understand watches. There's no way that they can figure this out. And now I don't see anybody with anything other than an Apple Watch generally. It's not nobody, but it's like 1%. Yeah, but you're like it's like, of watches. You just never see them.
Mine only costs $25 too, and it does everything that Apple Watch
Amazing. Does. And so, so I think that Apple's been pretty good at, and it comes down to execution. They do that really well. Next question.
And it's Talalik Lopez Waterman from Wilmington, Delaware, asking, I wonder how many zoomiso outputs a Mac Pro with some DeckLinks could handle.
Go ahead, Mitchell, real quick.
I guess we can do the math. 6 PCIe, 6 DeckLink quad cards. That's 48, I believe.
It could do 48. The limitation would be the bandwidth. So it really you can't right now do more than 16. So 2 of those cards is all you'd need to put in there, because that's all you could do at the moment. I'm sure that it would barely reach 15% capacity on the thing to do that. It could do 96, or it could do theoretically 96 if you used up the thunderbolts that are up at the top. So you could add a lot more to it if you wanted to. In fact, yeah, you could do a lot there. Anyway, next question.
Jack Ruppel from Breckenridge, Colorado, wants to know, what are the capabilities of Adobe PDF in 3D? This would make 3D content available to a broader public.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, the 3D capabilities of the PDF format are really limited. You can display a 3D object and kind of spin it around. I think if you were to visit like a Sketchfab website or something like that, you can do the same kind of thing on a web page. Web 3D interfaces are far more advanced than PDF's 3D interface. So I don't know that it makes a whole lot of sense to expand that. I mean, if they were to support USD complete with animation and interaction, there's a web format called GLTF or GLB that allows for quite a bit of interaction. a lot of automotive car configurators that you can go to the website of the car and customize the car and all that sort of thing are built on GLB, GLTF, which themselves can be built out of USDZ. So the amount of interaction you have there is really limited. And if I was introducing someone to 3D content, that wouldn't be the place to do it.
I think that the challenge really is with PDFs is that they have a lot of technical debt. So they've been around for a long time, and the development process for the PDFs is so painful for a lot of people, and the distribution of those PDFs. They're great for basic things, but there's been so much kind of glopped onto them, and so much, again, technical debt from being there for 30 years that I don't like. The 3D stuff's been out for a long time, and no one uses it. Because it's just like, oh, what am I gonna have to deal with that PDF to do it? I barely like using the forms. I just want to send something to somebody as a PDF and have it flat, and that has to do with the complexity that's built into it because it's been around for so long. And so I think that that's the challenge that they have right now. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, with a question. Does Alex still feel like folks won't want to wear a headset for very long? Is there any comfortable ergonomic that would work for a VR headset? And will you be able to see through to the real world?
Yes, Nick.
So in particular with the Vision Pro, it's what we're calling a mixed reality headset. So while you're wearing it, you have the ability to see to the outside world through the camera system. So it's essentially feeding you the outside world, even though you're in a closed headset. And it's really clear that Apple spent, again, a lot of time designing the ergonomics of this so that it will feel comfortable. It seems like they have, cooling in mind, even though they've got a lot of chips and a lot of displays going. They've thought of that. I really like what I'm seeing in terms of the ergonomics, the materials they're using, and the comfort elements of their design for this. So this to me appears like something you can wear for a long time. I've worn existing headsets from Meta and Vive and such for hours and hours and hours, and there are quite a few people who have. So I think it's something that will develop.
I bet you'll be able to wear it for as long as one whole MLS soccer game in 3D. That's my guess. So I bet you they're already working on that. So anyway, I think I was wrong. I really didn't envision what Apple was doing because you can see through it, because it is integrating all the apps that you would normally use. I think you're going to end up with a lot of long-term usage that people have. Whether that's good for your eyes or not, I don't know. Next question.
Next question from Gina Below from Appleton, Wisconsin. What safeguards might Apple have in place to protect Vision Pro users from accidentally tripping over their cat or dog while wearing the headset?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
It's got two cameras on the very, very bottom of the headset, so it can see down, and it's got cat and dog detection and sandbag detection.
Go ahead, Courtney, real quick.
Exactly what John said.
Go ahead, Nick.
It's got a lot more than just two cameras there too. I mean, it's got infrared, it's got RGB, so it's doing quite a lot. And so, you'll be able to see what's going on around you if you choose to.
And again, the thing is that it's constantly turning on and off, where you can see if someone walks into the room, they fade into what you're looking at. If you're close to something, it's going to fade up and show it to you. It is looking; those cameras are being fed back to you, so that you're not in a vacuum. Next question.
From Jeffrey Reyes from Bronx, New York, and the question is: do you foresee Apple's Vision Pro being the product that jumpstarts 3D design and 3D graphics, similar to the effect ChatGPT had on AI? I was disappointed seeing Apple spotlighting floating 2D screens in a 3D world rather than native 3D objects.
Go ahead, Nick.
Well, I mean, we're still accustomed to viewing media in flat formats. I mean, we have 3D printers for quite a long time, but we came from an era of newspapers and magazines, and so we've had 3D displays. We're comfortable with 2D content. So I think the approach of using I'm going to call it 2.5D style presentation within the space is sound and it's logical. But the challenge still today, it hasn't really been fully cracked, is that creating effective 3D content is still not easy. You can use photogrammetry and get things very quickly and easily into 3D, but it's still not perfect. There'll be, as AI systems develop and can start to recognize the world better, when I can do a LiDAR scan with my iPhone of a video tripod and all its mechanical complexities, and it looks like the proper video tripod with all of its mechanical complexities in a Vision Pro, then we're there.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
So if you watch the State of the Union, they actually cover this really well, and they show mixed media. They show 2D and 3D in the same scene. It's really well done. I suggest you go watch that video.
Go ahead, Philippe.
Seconding John here, State of the Union. They show dealing with 3D objects and so on and so forth.
And speaking of 3D objects, I was going to ask Alan about, you've done a lot of product shots like what we saw. So what we saw there was not, a video of the headset, but a very, very high quality, rendering of that headset. What are the real challenges, Alan, with producing something at that level for, broadcast?
You're talking about the final image quality.
Yeah,
that
just
Apple
the final image quality, because there's little things like the stretchy fabric. I looked at that and I was like, that's really hard to render.
Yeah. Well, Apple's solution is to throw a whole lot of money and a whole lot of time at it. They one of the things Apple does really well, their philosophy is to do just a few products and then hyper obsess over every detail of that product, rather than a lot of products and just get it most of the way there. They take that same approach to marketing and advertising. They obsess. They absolutely obsess over every detail. And they spend the time and the money to make sure it looks just right. So,
and is it like, from a technical perspective, is it, do you get into situations with oversampling, anti-aliasing, geometry? Like, what do you think what are the big roadblocks there?
Well, there's really no roadblocks, again, when you put enough time and energy and money to something.
When you're willing to spend 6 hours a frame on rendering it out, it's fine.
Yeah, and one of the things I will say this, that one of the biggest challenges, I think, with Apple is that the products are so insanely simple, yet you have to figure out a way to make them look beautiful and unique and different, and it really just comes down to subtlety. Yeah. It's subtlety of lighting. It's subtlety of concept. They'll concept things over and over and over. They get to just the right thing, and then they fine tune it. And we spend rounds and rounds and rounds of detail, just obsessing over every detail and every nuance to the nth degree.
Yeah. So that's great. Next question.
Talalik Lopez Waterman, Wilmington, Delaware is where he is right now. Sorry for a simple iPhone question. How do I make 16:9 default on my iPhone camera? I'm not liking having to set it every time I take a photo.
So I would recommend not doing that. Your camera is naturally capturing a larger image. When you set it to 16:9, it's just cropping to that. It's cropping part of the image out. So I would always shoot at its native format and then crop it in photos so that you still have the data there. But when you do 16:9, you're not getting more in the 16:9. You're just cutting a piece out of the native sensor. So I don't know how to do it by default, because I've never done it, because I don't do any crops on those things. I'd rather crop it in post. Next question.
Al Trivet in Carmichael, California. Thoughts on the idea of spatial computing keynotes?
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited by that. I think that one of the little appreciated features that there was shown at the talks yesterday was the kind of the reactions that you can do with the video subsystem in the Mac operating systems or the Apple's operating systems. So they showed a demo of people reacting to something in a Zoom meeting, and instead of the balloons and such just being like a little icon or something that goes over the video, it's in front of and behind you, and following the depth of field and all of that. And what I'm thinking is that the technology that they're applying using that is an early stage of being able to fully composite you into a virtual environment when you're presenting, so that you could be in your living room but look like you're on a keynote stage with a very large screen. They kind of hinted towards that, and there was a woman presenting a keynote presentation, and she had coworkers floating. The only thing that was awkward for me is like they're floating in her bedroom. It's kind of weird. But in my living room, I wouldn't mind, having the ability to have this presence as if I'm standing on a stage, presenting with this massive, screen behind me, and I can see my audience out in front of me virtually. I think that there's it brings back that sense of being on a stage and getting to see your audience. It's different than sitting in a Zoom meeting and your screen keynote takes over and your grid view of your participants is off to the side. So I think this is a really good direction to be going in.
Next question.
Next question from Greg Kramer in Washington, D.C. asking, I want to explore the highest impact accessories for shooting much of it on my iPhone. It's got a 14 Pro. Does the panel have any experience with the Beast Grip rig and their wide telephoto and anamorphic lens add-ons?
I haven't seen the Beast Grip. A lot of us are using small rig for a lot of those accessories, and then moment lenses. And the small rigs actually take the moment lenses. So you might want to look at the small rig hard case for it, and then moment lenses on top of that. You may find to be pretty solid. All right, we are changing subjects and going into the second hour, and we're really, really excited to have Kelcey Gray here. Hi, Kelcey. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Pardon me. Just had to find that mute button.
Yeah, no, all
always
good.
the culprit. Always the culprit. Yeah, super happy to be here. Thanks for having me join.
Yeah, and I said right at the top of the hour, how I found Kelcey was I bought the book. I bought the book, and I have a lot of typography books, and I should read more of them. But I thought that this was a great book to get into this, and I'm always trying to find books to suggest to people. So like, hey, if you really want to start thinking about this, so I started going through the book, and I was like, oh, we should just really try to get Kelcey on and have her talk about this. So I'm really excited to have you on. And, I think that just to kind of set it up, as I said at the beginning of the hour, I just think that typography is very unknown to a lot of people that do what we do, digital media and so on and so forth. And it's so important because it really tells someone that you have that you have taste. I'm just saying, like they get all this graphics, they do all this stuff, but then we have like 3 different fonts and the Papyrus and Comic Sans. We all know, we've all seen the Saturday Night Live thing, which is like such an inside joke for us, for people who do type. I think most people who watch Saturday Night Live had no idea what they were talking about. And they were like, well, I just use those fonts all the time. Anyway, so I think that it's so important for us to understand this and how it integrates into what we're doing. And so few of us actually know how to do this unless you came out of print. I spent years in print where there was long discussions about, very small amounts of movement and people being upset. And then we have broadcasters like CNN that just take our fonts and stretch them every time they just kind of stretch up and everything down. I literally can't watch CNN because I just watch those. Every time the font stretches up, I'm like, I gotta go. I can't do this. So anyway, why don't you introduce yourself as well as the basic concepts of that? We've got a lot of questions stacking up already. So I think it's going to be a really busy hour.
Good. Yeah. Well, the more you know about anything, the more that you can build tastes and opinions about that thing. So I'm happy to help build some taste and some preference here. So let's see, just a sort of quick bio. I really got sort of in deep in typography and in graphic design, probably in grad school. I attended the Maryland Institute College of Art out in Baltimore, Maryland, and was exposed to some amazing folks, spaces. Of course, the curriculum was incredible there. And met some people there that would later be my mentors and later sort of shape my own tastes and preferences. I worked in the sort of studio scene for a long time where I Did everything from sort of like on-screen graphics to animation, lots of publications, even dabbled in illustration and things like that. And then kind of got an itch. I couldn't sort of sit in one spot for 8 or 9 hours a day, and started sort of teaching part-time, actually teaching Typography 1 at Washington University in St. Louis. And I really liked that sort of like, to be so cliche, that light bulb moment, that aha moment, where people would sort of come in, students would come in and not knowing anything about type. It was incredible to sort of be that shepherd, to be that person to say, yes, this is super niche and esoteric, but here's how incredible it is. And here's how you can be like a more thoughtful and informed designer. Right. So that became of immense interest to me, and I decided to make the move to teaching full time. So that's what I do right now at the University of Texas at Austin. But I also maintain a pretty hefty personal practice, as well as started writing about 5 or 6 years ago, and it turned into this. So constantly doing something, whether it's for the young people that I teach, or for my own practice or for clients. So. So very quick bio about me.
Yeah, and I think that I think you have a little bit of a deck of some of the stuff that you've worked on and some of the concepts. Is that something that you have available to you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do kind of a walkthrough of that. Yeah. So folks, you can see some of the work behind the human face here. Yeah. A lot of what you'll be looking at, I would say, is kind of a more playful expression of typography, kind of the flashy, kind of exciting projects. Right. But I have to admit, some of the sort of black and white, mundane typesetting, basic presentation of information is sort of just as delicious to work on. So I
find that the use of white space is just the thing. Like, like you can put the text in there, but understanding exactly. I was just throwing something together, really some text on top of an image yesterday, and very quickly, threw it together, showed it to the client really fast. Like, here's what we're thinking, and they're like, "That looks great." And then there was the next half an hour of me measuring everything out and making sure that all the little, everything's all lined up and everything else. They liked the first version, but I was like, the second version will be just a little better. And it took longer to do that last little bit than it took to throw it together.
I mean, like, what is not seen is just as important as what is visible, right? So yeah, completely agree. White space is the thing. I'll head over to my desktop here really quickly. You're going to get a glimpse of my sand dune wallpaper and Keynote here. So a quick showcase of some playful stuff. Here I said I worked in animation as well. This was a large brand project for Rockwell Beer Company.
And what do you animate in?
Yeah, so the bit that's animating here is, you see how the typography sort of stretches, and sort of flexes. It's so interesting that you mentioned the CNN stretch type, because there's type that's built to stretch that looks good when it's variable, right? Yep. And then there's, some typefaces that are certainly not built.
The one CNN uses.
Yeah. I'm going to trust you in that opinion there. Yeah. But here we're just being really intentional about sort of how the strokes are animating as the letters.
And what makes this one easier to stretch?
One of the things I would say is the really kind of consistent stroke weight. So that's going to be like the thickness of the lines, right? In typography, this is called contrast. So if you think of, let's think about if you've seen like the Vogue masthead or Harper's Bazaar, it's got those letters have some really thick parts and some really thin parts. That's high contrast. Yeah. Whereas if you look at like the BBC logo, right? Those letter forms, those strokes are all very consistent. They're all roughly the same width. Okay. Right, that's very low contrast. So I think it's the low contrast nature that allows this type to flex this way.
That's great.
But it's more than just the animation as well. We had a lot of fun with the different sort of variabilities of the logo type, but much more so than that, a real treat to work on was the environmental signage. The concept for this brewery and tasting room was, of course, they hopped on that shipping container trend. But we wanted to do something a little bit different. And so since the type sort of, on screen allowed itself to stretch and flex, we wanted to do that in the space as well. So you can see that kind of corner wrap on that sort of like front axes happening.
How do you set up when you have something that's uneven like that? I mean, it's one thing to have the text, to know how you're going to print the text when it's flat, but now you've got all these ridges and you're going around a corner. Is it something that you're building in a 3D model of it? Or how do you figure out or how do you even deliver that?
Yeah, great question. So this was actually in partnership with a local sign painter. This brewery exists in St. Louis. And so we worked with the architectural team who was building out the space. We got those dimensions of the shipping container, and we actually delivered a flat file, something akin to like an Illustrator file, Adobe Illustrator, or even a PDF. I can't remember what that exact delivery is, but we actually didn't build out a 3D model for this. We delivered the flats to the sign painter, and he did the math and the painting.
That's great.
And did an incredible job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also got to work with a neon sign fabricator, which was pretty great.
Do you just deliver EPS files or AI files to them, and they figure out how they're gonna run the neon?
Yeah. They just look at the paths.
Yep.
But also a huge part of it was packaging design as well. So and typography, of course, existing on both levels, on multiple levels, right? And so like we have to think about things like legibility and readability, of course. But also sort of like how big should we size the type? So like what point size should it be, right?
Yep.
And that varies based on the sort of like level of intimacy, right? So you're holding a beer can or soda can or sparkling water really close to you, so you can get by with sort of smaller point sizes. But when you're looking at a super graphic, something like the front of a building or a billboard, of course you've got to go larger. So the fonts that we were choosing, that we were speccing, right, like had to function at multiple scales, at multiple levels.
Right.
So super fun project to work on.
Yeah.
Another one here, these guys, they're a brand consulting firm out of DC called Novel. And they were really the sort of brand tenet was they are big on what they call the experience ecosystem. So they were sort of like one part creative, one part sort of scientific almost.
Right.
And so they commissioned a series of illustrations that sort of balanced that sort of creative and analytical, right? And so here's a series of graphics that I created for them.
It has a very classic look to it, like that's where. And do you see that as something that serif kind of oftentimes brings you? Because a lot of us don't see serif very often anymore.
It's really interesting. And you talk to folks in the type community, and some folks are, like diehard sans serif, right? They think they're sort of cleaner, more contemporary. And then it's sort of on the other side of the coin, right? You have folks that love the serif.
Right. And serif, by the way, for those watching, you can explain the serif what's probably more technically than I can.
Sure. So so technically, a serif is like an entry stroke or an exit stroke of a letter. So if you're thinking about a capital T, a sans serif is just going to have a horizontal bar and a vertical bar, right? No frills, no ornamentation. But if you think about the T in like Times New Roman, right? There's sort of those little hangers on, right? Those sort of entry strokes that attach to those horizontal and vertical components of the letter form. And those are the more traditional letter. They automatically lean a little bit more bookish, a little bit more academic, right? Those are our letter forms that have serifs, okay? And then sans serifs are the ones that do not have those additional little strokes. Sort of at the ends of the letter forms. Which one is easier to read? I'm asking myself that my own question. Gosh, there's lots of studies out there, and I think they're pretty inconclusive. I think the thing that sort of good designers worth their salt are thinking about is what works the best based on context. Right.
And I think the feel, I mean, I definitely, when I'm using a serif font, I'm thinking about it feeling classic, feeling,
sure.
Something that's got some heft to it, or something that's important, because it's not something most of us, because we're using computers and watching a lot of visual things, generally, most people aren't using serif fonts. And so it's kind of, it's a kickback to something, that we've done in the past, but not in a bad way. I'm just saying, like I like rustic things, and it's a little rustic at times. But I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it in a way that gives it a classic feel to it.
Yeah, I think it's all about context. I do think that sans serif is kind of the preference on screen, just from what I've seen. Yeah. Gosh, let's see. We can keep scrubbing through some work if you want,
just keep
we can dive
through.
into questions.
Yeah, we'll dive into questions very soon. So
okay,
we'll do this for another 5 minutes, and then we're going to jump into the questions.
Sure. Please stop me whenever.
Great.
So you're looking at kind of a weird looking stencil here. And this is one of the things that I created in grad school about 10 years ago. And this is the letter maker stencil. I'm actually going to hold up one in my little thumbnail, if you're able to see it here. It is this here. It's a piece of acrylic, and it's kind of an unconventional looking stencil, right? Like typically when you think of a stencil, you see an A and you make the same repeatable A.
So and these are all the pieces that you need to build all the letters.
You got it. Yeah.
Really cool.
So this kind of lettering is called modular lettering, right? So like think of modular furniture, think about Legos, right? Like Lego gives you all the parts and pieces you need to construct an X-wing or, a tropical paradise. Okay.
Right.
So what this does is it gives you the parts and pieces to kind of craft your own letter forms. And this is really interesting, or was really interesting for me, this pursuit, because it sort of balances this sort of three things: typography, of course, which I'm interested in, is why I'm here. My interest in building tools that also really sort of sowed the seeds for the book as well, giving people a tool, and also it's sort of like a lot of my work sort of surrounds delight in the daily, or taking something that's conventional or expected and kind of turning it on its head, or giving it kind of a new or fresh perspective. And so this allowed me to actually build a really incredible community of people. I toured this internationally, did lots of different workshops. And it was like a really great entry point for people who are maybe not so confident in their drawing skills. But
now,
can
people buy these stencils? Do you sell the stencils?
I do sell them, yeah. So I think the URL is, it's lettermakerstencil.com. I think lettermaker.com was taken. But I sort of put this project on pause for a little while, because part of design, right, is prototyping and iterating, right? Just as you said, you presented something to a client and we're like, well, let me iterate it a little bit. Let me tweak it a little bit. Right. So I'm releasing it very soon in a thinner material. So this is actually still a quite thick acrylic. I've found a newer and better stencil material.
That's great.
Yeah. So very fun project. Made a lot of things sort of centering around that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I'll move a little faster here. Just to showcase of how I like to experiment with letter form.
Now, what did you what is that one right there? I saw that when I was looking at your what is that for? Is that just a close up of what you had before there?
It is, yes. So this image, which is like, you're getting a little bit of grain here, strangely, in this image. It was for creative process. This was kind of a workshop experience, also taking place in St. Louis. I used to live there. This was run by the St. Louis Fashion Fund, and it was sort of a series of salons that brought people together to talk about architecture, literature, poetry, design, fine arts, all these things. And it was centered in the sort of fashion district in St. Louis, historically the sort of fashion epicenter of St. Louis. And so the letter forms here are digitally made out of sort of like stitches, sewing machine stitches. So kind of a nod there
what
to
font is that?
The location. It's one that I made.
Really?
Yeah.
It'd be fun to extrude that and render it.
Yeah. Very doable.
Yeah, exactly. It looks really nice. It's really nice.
Thank you.
We have a ton of, we're going to come back to this, but we have a ton of questions stacking up.
Let's do it.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go to the first question.
Okay.
First one in from Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. Andy wants to know which typeface is considered the most legible for video graphics.
Ooh, for video graphics. Hard to say definitively which one is the best. Because again, it's all about context. One thing I would probably recommend in terms of legibility is to sort of find a nice kind of Goldilocks font. So for example, not too thin. That's not going to be legible very well at a distance. Sometimes if something goes a little bit too bold, the letters can sort of kludge together. Right? They can sort of melt together. That can cause some legibility issues as well, especially if we're talking about from a distance. Maybe some of your viewers are looking at graphics on screen in an airport, right? They're moving on a moving sidewalk or something. So not too thin, letters are going to fall apart. Not too thick, they're going to kludge together. Okay. Also, typically fonts that have high X heights.
What's an X height? Can you explain X height?
Yeah. We'll get there. So let's see if I'm wondering, do I have it in the book? Yes, I do. Okay. So I'll hold this up on screen. I hope you're able to see it.
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah, we can see it.
So I'll define it first. The X height is basically the height of the lowercase letter in any font. Okay. So we're going to get technical here. Here's an illustration. I hope I have it. Yes.
A little too, there we go. Yep, we can see it.
Yes. Okay. So you can see the sort of height of where's my finger there? The height of the sort of main part of this lowercase letter. Okay. This green part right here, this is considered an ascender. That's any part of the letter that goes above that X height.
Right.
And then a descender is any letter form like a lowercase p, lowercase q that have those little tails that extend below the baseline. Okay. So X height of the lowercase letter. Typically fonts that have high X heights are going to be very legible. Okay. Because basically what you're doing is the proportion of the lowercase to the uppercase is the lowercase is a little bit taller.
Right.
Okay. Those letter forms become a little bit more open. Okay. It's a little bit more of an easy read. What's interesting, though, is that not all X heights are sort of created equal. So let's say you're setting Times New Roman in 12 point. It's a good baseline for a lot of people. And then let's say you're using something like Gotham. That's a really popular sans serif, also in 12 point. Okay. I see some thumbs up for Gotham. All right. Even though they're the same point size, their X heights are going to be different.
Right.
Right. So something to kind of think through. Also, I would say, I know that a lot of, say, news outlets use a lot of all caps. I love all caps. I do not think it's shouting for what it's worth. Unpopular opinion. But lowercase letters, when you have those little ascenders and descenders, they're a little bit easier to make out on screen, right? Just because the viewer can really distinguish those little details easier than some all caps settings. So it's hard to say definitively use that font, right?
Right. No,
but I can offer some insight there.
No, that's great. We're the most common thing that we say on this show is it depends. so like, we totally get you. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah. Good.
Oh, can't hear you, Courtney.
Sorry. Well, it's interesting, having designed a lot of electronic teleprompters over the years, there's always been a discussion about typefaces on video, which is easier to read because they used to insist we'd always get teleprompter scripts in all caps. And I would insist that since we went to adjustable size typefaces, that mixed case, uppercase and lowercase, sans serif was a lot easier to read, especially for moving text on the screen. Do you think that's true? Because it gives you, when you're reading text aloud, especially, it gives you cues as to where the beginning of a sentence is, where the end of a sentence is, what's an acronym versus a word. And if it's all caps, you lose those little cues. So if you're reading script, or if it's visible on the screen, do you find that descenders are upper and lowercase? Mixed case works a lot better than all uppercase.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think mixed cases is a great way to go. I really love your case in point about acronyms as well. Us being able to sort of parse out those little linguistic differences. I wrote a paper last year about it called "Capital Letters Might Save Your Life." And it's about actually typography in sort of like medical settings. And there was a study that was done on what's called look-alike, sound-alike drugs, where there might be a drug. I'm not going to remember the drug names here on screen, but there might be two drugs that start with hydro and then end in zine, right? And then the middle part of the word, the first one might be like thala, and the sort of second drug might be oro, right? And so there was a study that was done where this the sort of study was about, they actually capitalized that middle part, right? The part of the language that was different in each drug. And they called these tall man letters, which I think is actually really sort of silly and charming. But what they were doing was they were sort of testing to see if those little typographic switches could help doctors, nurses, medical professionals, right? Folks who are handling drugs. Their hope was that it would help those people differentiate between those two words and therefore not make a medication error, right? So
and
people
did it work?
It's sort of inconclusive. They found some success in it, but they also tried a couple things like bolding those two parts of the words or highlighting those two parts of the words. I will say it worked well enough to where the FDA has a list that they've published of look-alike, sound-alike drugs, right, where they are using those tall man letters. So it's out there, but it's not enforced. So that's just a tangent to sort of say mixed case can be hugely important for our eyes to be able to make those visual distinctions.
The tall man words, is that sometimes referred to as camel case, where you have two words that are run together with a capital in the middle? Or
I've not heard of that before.
Yeah, we call it, we a lot of camel case is regular. I mean, I guess what we would consider lowercase and uppercase, right? And then instead of all caps, we call it camel case. It's a common term in our world.
Well, I thought it was where you have to, like in a URL or something where you can't, where spaces aren't allowed, where you'll run two words together. The second word will be capitalized, and so it'll have a capital letter in the middle of the word. That's what I always call it.
Yeah, go ahead,
I use that for file naming conventions. It really works. Yeah.
Well, kind of. If you know, so there, if you do a lot of Unix scripts, anybody who puts a capital in anything, you're like, who did this? You know, like it has to be all lowercase because then I can't type it fast enough. Go ahead, Chris.
Kelcey, first of all, fascinating. Thank you for coming. I'm very curious. Is there any data, like hard data, that has been, or studies that have been done that address legibility and retention when it comes to using all caps versus sentence case, or do we normally use the term title case, you know, like the typical bad PowerPoint slide where the beginning of every word is capitalized, and what does that even mean, and how do we do, well, of and the don't need to be capitalized. Well, who made that rule? You know, but is there any data on that? Because I, for one, like to be able to say to people, well, 75% of, dentists all prefer this gum, you know?
Yeah. Gosh, it's hard to say. It depends. How about I give that as an answer, Alex?
Okay,
exactly.
I'm struggling to sort of recall any specific data because sort of the circles that my brain sort of lives in, the sort of kinds of projects I'm working on, it's usually more sort of publication focused. So we're going off of things like Chicago, MLA, APA kind of like styling. So like in that case, like, yes, of these kinds of articles and prepositions would be lowercase, proper nouns, uppercase. So I'm kind of like leaning on those kinds of rules. But in terms of hard data, I think that's such a fantastic question. And I think the easiest answer that I can give you right now is I'm not certain, but I'm sure it's out there.
Well, and I know that as a kid, learning how to read, I cheated a lot. And it's a long story, but the shortest version of it was I didn't read, but I looked for words that had a shape. So like if the reading assignment was, what color was Timmy's bike? Well, I didn't read the assignment because I was cheating. So I could read, but I couldn't read well. And so I would look for words. The word bike has a tall thing and then some stuff, and then another tall thing, and then some stuff. So then I'd scan through the story looking for a word that was that shape.
Yeah.
And then I'd go, oh, there it is. It's bike. Timmy's bike was green. And that was just, and I wasn't scanning for the word bike. I was looking for the shape. And so to me, all caps is like, well, everything's the same shape.
Okay.
I find it less legible.
We're going to move.
The reason
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. The reason that I'm sort of like looking off over here is I'm looking at my other monitor and searching for, I won't be able to find it here since I'm sure we have several questions. Here's one great article about readability and legibility, if I'm able to drop it in chat. Okay. And then there's another one that's all about sort of word shape. Exactly like you're talking about, right? So you're looking at form rather than sort of content. So this is a great Medium article that I've referenced before and shared with my students. But there's one other one. It's better. I just got to dig it up. Maybe it's something I can share with Lindsay, and he can follow up a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
And it's from David Brady in New York, New York. David wants to know, why does Comic Sans get such a bad rap?
Oh, my goodness. I knew this question was coming. Okay. Some people think because it's so popular, because it's a system font, that means, right, it's going to be on all your PCs, it's going to be on all your Macs, right? That since it was sort of an option in those early days, right, and it's got this sort of like childlike, sort of cartoonish look about it, people sort of began to sort of misuse it, right? I said the word context before. If you're going to a very serious setting and you see Comic Sans, there's sort of a great irony there, or it's sort of like, oh, that's not so appropriate for this setting, right? But when you see it maybe in a kid's classroom or in a comic, right, then that sort of feels right. And so I think one of the reasons it got such a bad rap was because of its use in those sort of unconventional or unlikely scenarios. But let me tell you, Comic Sans, one of the most legible fonts out there. The reason is, Chris, it's so interesting that you shared what kind of reader that you were as a kid. Thanks for sharing that. There's
still have problems, actually.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of readers, right? Folks that look for word shape, those that are dyslexic, right? Part of those that have dyslexia, one of their problems is they have sort of struggles differentiating between letter forms. Okay, there's some really common letter pairs that can look really similar to those eyes. And Comic Sans, because it's so wiggly, because it's so imperfect, next time you use it, okay, which maybe never, but next time you've got it up on the screen, look, there's not a single straight line in that font. Okay. Right. And part of that negligence, that sort of casting aside of perfect geometry, actually works in its favor. It is so legible. And there's a bunch of folks right now that are trying to make dyslexic typefaces that have a lot of strange characteristics, a lot of organic forms to help readers differentiate between letter forms. So it gets a lot of hate, Comic Sans. I get it. It's sort of a joke. It's sort of a meme now, right? But it's actually really functional.
Next question.
Unsak Durji from Dharamshala, India says, greeting panel, which typeface, sans serif or serif, are best for lower thirds and which are your favorites?
Let's see. Okay, I'm a bit naive here. Tell me what a lower third is.
The lower third is the graphic that goes down below us to say our names. So that, or in the UK it's called a strap, but I think it's so much better strap'em. So it's that bar at the bottom with the two, your name and where you're working from.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So some interesting industry lingo I'm not familiar with there. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Gosh, I think that the sort of same answer, or the answer I would give is the same answer I would give earlier, which is sort of that Goldilocks middle ground, not too bold, not too thin, right. High X heights. And something I didn't mention was, so the space between two letters, okay, whatever that space is, that's called kerning. You may have heard that term before, okay? The space between all the letters along a word or a line, that's called tracking, or more commonly these days, letter spacing, okay? So typically, if you, especially if this, what did you say, strap?
Lower
third, we can call it both. Right, typically if it's sort of flashing quickly or animated, or if your user is moving, right? I would say try to find a font or go in and do this yourself. Add a little bit more letter spacing. Again, this is great for distance reading. This is great for movement or animation. What it's going to allow is to help us sort of see the differences between letters. We're adding more white space. Yeah. That's the thing, right? So adding a little bit of tracking there can help as well.
Next question.
David Brady's back from New York, New York. What is it about Helvetica from a design typeface perspective that makes that font so ubiquitous?
Okay. So there's a real sort of love in the design community and beyond for Swiss modernism, right? And that's where Helvetica is sort of coming from. Swiss modernism is this kind of style where it's very clean. There's a use of sans serif. There's lots of white space, very flat graphics. Okay, we've got lots of white, black, red, maybe another single color. Okay, it's sort of an honoring of the sort of clean aesthetic, okay? And Helvetica, I think, was just sort of right place, right time, especially when we think about the design of the New York City subway system, right, which is the sort of classic example of Helvetica. It's really great in lots of different weights, though I think Helvetica Light gets a little bit too light. But when we're talking in the regulars, the bolds, the blacks, right? It's really legible at a distance. It has a decent X height. I feel like I'm a little bit of a broken record here. And I think also in the hands of some really famous designers like Massimo Vignelli, for example, really sort of knew how to use that typeface, okay, and apply it really successfully. And so many designers have picked up on that sort of era in design, picked up on that aesthetic of Swiss modernism and followed in the footsteps of Massimo Vignelli and Karl Gerstner and others. And gosh, one of the answers I could give is it just works because they used it so well. So it's not so much about how successful is the typeface or the font. Okay, those things are different. We can get to that in a second. But how well is it used, right? And I think Vignelli used it really well, sort of gave us a really great example, okay? And then others have continued to harness that aesthetic sense.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, the first couple minutes of the Helvetica documentary do a really great job at showing just how ubiquitous it is. It's like, a couple of minutes of B-roll of New York City where it is everywhere. Even the tops of the buses with the bus number. And I agree. It works. Nobody said, oh, I can't read that. They might say, it looks boring. But they never said, I can't read it. And I always like to mention that if people don't know, on the DVD, if you can find it, of the Helvetica documentary, is a whole second documentary which is stuff that didn't make the director's cut.
Oh my goodness.
And it's all still super interesting.
Wow.
I love that movie. And a real friend I can sit down and watch that movie with.
Go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the fact that a lot of these fonts that we use in the video business nowadays were created well before video was available. And Helvetica is one of them that's been around a very, very long time. And other fonts that sort of somehow found their way into video and being very, very readable. It's an interesting phenomenon.
Next question.
Next question from Tuomo Koloma from Helsinki, Finland. As a typography expert, what do you think about the ubiquitous use of an emoji? A threat or an opportunity?
Oh my goodness. What a great question. Ubiquitous use of emojis. Okay. So, threat or opportunity, it depends on which emoji you're using, I guess. But in all seriousness, right? Like an emoji is just another tool of communication. Okay. And so when another word for graphic design, we see this a lot in curricula, right, is visual communication. And anything that you see is communicating to you. Okay. And so a lot of what we're dealing with in graphic design is we have kind of two ways of creating that communication: type and image. Okay, you could sort of include color in image as well. And so when I say typography, right, we've got things like point size, case, weight, all these things that we've been discussing. Image, right, that includes photography, that includes illustration, that includes shape, form, these kinds of things, right? And so I think emojis, personally, love them. That's great. Maybe don't like include them in an email to, that prospective job that you're going after. But I think that they're just another communication tool, right? An example of visual communication rather than typographic communication. The thing that we as graphic designers are sort of grappling with is, when is it appropriate or when does it make sense to use type to communicate something versus could I do that same thing with an image, right? Or when do I need both? Okay, so I think in terms of your emoji usage, sort of you do you on one hand, but also think about like, what do I need to do to communicate here? Is just an emoji enough, or do I need to include language to support that? Or can I just use that text instead? No emoji necessary. Up to you.
Next question.
Morgan Price, Victoria, British Columbia in Canada. Kelcey, when and why do you recommend animating text in presentations and videos? For example, squishing and squashing, like on the Rockwell animation on your website. Are there any specific tools you like to use?
Ooh, okay. So a couple questions in there. I'll start with the tools. When I'm animating type, I'm usually doing that in After Effects. Even if you're sort of like a Premiere Pro fan, or if you're using other sort of like video editing software there, I find that for sort of purely typographic animations, or even type that's going to be overlaid on top of video footage, I would say do that in After Effects first, then pull it into Premiere or wherever else you're working. That's typically the way that I'll work with animated type. And then when to animate or when not to animate. I would say don't just do it because it's flashy. There's got to be something that necessitates the need for that motion. Okay, like what is motion really adding to it? So for example, if you're thinking about sort of credits for a movie, right? And let's imagine we have like a black background. Okay, and then a font, doesn't matter. We've got some type that slowly fades in. Okay, imagine maybe we've also got a swell of music as well. Okay, if that type were just to boop appear, right, without that slow animation, it's going to give you a different kind of feeling, right? So in that case, the animation is really adding to the concept, really adding to the mood, right, and really adding to the emotion that you're wanting the user to feel. So I say animating type, so cool, often called kinetic typography in the industry, but don't just do it because you can. There's got to be some kind of purpose to it. For Rockwell Beer Co., one of their sort of brand tenets was fluidity. These guys did not brew the same beer year to year. right? So any month you show up to their tasting room, they're going to have a totally different menu. And so this idea of fluidity, it made sense not to have a static logo, right? It made sense to add sort of motion to it. And so conceptually, it fit, right? So we animated it. But be thinking about that before you just go into the Adobe Bridge presets and do the flames or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I do a lot of keynotes, and how every piece of text comes in is, I have a whole format that I have planned for that. So it's something that, like it means something every time it does it.
Yeah.
Next question.
From Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Wilmington, Delaware. Are font styles like clothes? Do they change by decade, or are they timeless?
Ooh, I love this question. I love all these questions. Let's see. There are some fonts that people would argue are quite timeless. So I'll rattle off a few here. Bodoni is one you may have heard of. Gotham, Helvetica, Baskerville, Georgia. A lot of these are kind of quite timeless. A lot of the original sort of system fonts that came on those first Macs, right, are kind of now considered timeless. But absolutely, they change season to season. And I think it also varies designer to designer, client to client as well. You have trends in type design and in graphic design, just like you would have trends anywhere else. But again, all about context, all about application, all about client needs, perhaps your preference. Right now, I would say in the sort of the type landscape, we're seeing a lot of kind of anti-modernism, actually, anti-Helvetica. And I don't mean to say that there's a negativity towards Helvetica. I just mean there's some real positive energy towards creating fonts that have sort of more wiggle, more movement. Psychedelic fonts were actually really popular about a year ago. And so we're seeing a lot of those organic forms as kind of a pushback to the clean modernism aesthetic of sort of the mid-20th century. So yes and yes. Right? Some are absolutely timeless, but yes, there are definitely trends.
Next question.
John Snyder, Reno, Nevada, asking, are typography choices dependent on audience demographics as well as the content, or solely the content that is being presented?
Ooh, okay. Another great question that I think I'll pull up a slide for, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let me get oriented here. Keynote is telling me that there's an update. Thank you, Keynote. Okay. Here we go. All right. So you should be seeing like a highway sign right now on screen. Okay, excellent. Thanks for those thumbs up. So even though like we might not pay much attention to this is typography. Okay, this is styled. Typography, put simply, is the visual component of the written word. Maybe we should have started the hour with that. It's the way that type looks, okay? The way that text looks, all right? The visual component of the written word. And so like there's a lot of visuals applied here. There are a lot of decisions being made here. And so if we look at this, right, it's kind of bold. We've got a mixed use of cases. So exit is in all caps, but Chattahoochee River, that's in mixed case or title case. The numbers, okay, 198 and 2 are larger, again, kind of to aid in legibility there. And so if we sort of were to strip some of the typography out of it, we'd simply just be looking at the text, right? So this is the difference between type and text. All right, text is just what it says. Okay, this is what our copywriters are dealing with. All right, but you put it in the hands of the graphic designers or other creatives, right? Then it's our job to sort of apply typography to that. Okay, and so going back to this is actually called Highway Gothic. Yes, there is a name for this typeface, Highway Gothic. And as you'll see here, I've got a source at the bottom.
And is it
of this
really just created for highways? Is that like, is it Highway Gothic because it's like what everybody uses on every sign?
That was its intention. Yes, to be created for. And so I'm sourcing some of these images from a URL down there that I invite you to explore more. It's practicaltypography.com. This is Butterick's Practical Typography, a great resource, especially if you've made some decisions and you need to to provide some evidence for those decisions, like you're going to a client and you're saying, here's why I'm doing this, this is a great source for you. And again, I can drop the URL in, or some generous person here can copy and paste that in the chat. And so we could look at this example, right?
That'd be hard to do it 75 miles an hour.
This is a beautiful font, right? But we can't read it, right? Especially if you're my husband and you're going 90 miles down the freeway, okay? And so even though this is a beautiful font, it doesn't work in application. Michael, really quickly, remind me what that question was.
Mitchell. It's the typography choices depending on audience demographics as well as the content or solely the content that is being presented.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mitchell. So here we have to think about audience and we have to think about context, right? Because our audience is needing to make quick decisions. They're moving quickly, physically. Okay. We can go back to this other slide here. Right. We also have to consider like the emotional state of some people as well. There are some people who have real trouble with navigating, the freeway through city streets, right? So some of our users could be quite stressed as well. So we wouldn't want to, use a font here that's really aggressive, right? Or really confrontational here too, right? So we want something clean, functional. See the tracking here, how spaced out these letters are, okay? They're quite bold. Yeah, I see, Mitchell, you're sort of making these kind of motions with your hand, these sort of staccato motions. Yeah, really easy to read. Yeah. And so, yes, we have to think about demographic. We have to think about audience. We have to think about context, environment, emotional states, all these things, if we can.
Next question.
From Bill Davis on our panel, and in San Diego, California, typography is such a subtle art. How do you suggest newbies start to notice the factors that distinguish something like similar sans serif fonts?
Okay. Another really great question. So newbies out there, of course, I'm going to encourage everybody to pick up my book, but it's more about crafting letter forms, sort of making your own. There's a little bit of observational kind of exercises in here as well that can help you get to notice more type kind of in your environment, which is also great for that. But newbies, I'm really going to recommend, I'm an academic, so I'm giving you all the book recommendations. I'm really going to recommend Thinking with Type. Okay. This is by Ellen Lupton, a really famed designer and design writer in the industry. She's been doing it for decades. She's actually publishing a new edition coming out soon, a third edition of this. And it's got all that technical goodness that we were talking about, everything from X height to tracking, with really beautiful examples of posters, data visualizations, on-screen graphics, little bits of history in here as well. Really great resource for folks new to the field. So highly recommend her book as well. And lastly, I would just say, start to sort of try on some fonts for size. How do you know that you're going to like a new dish? You've got to try it. How do you start to pay attention to different flavor profiles, right? Or different preparations of cuisine? You have to try them, right? So expose yourself to lots of different fonts, okay? Next time you open a Google Doc or text edit document and start typing something, try setting type in a different font that you've never used before. Right? The more you expose yourself, the more you practice those observation skills, the more you notice those details, you'll start to be able to distinguish one font from another.
Next question.
Dave Troutman from Edmonton, Canada, asking, are ligatures still important to typesetting as much as they used to be?
They are. Okay. So ligatures, for those that don't know, is basically a custom glyph or a little unit of type where two letters have been kludged together. Mitchell, I keep looking at your screen and you're doing little hand signals. I love it. So let me pull up a page in my book here. So this is, you might see if you're typing the word Swift, okay? After you type that T, you may notice that Word or Google Docs replaces the F and the T as separate glyphs as a little combined unit. Okay. So here an illustration in my book, kind of showing you ligatures. So instead of an F and an L, okay, instead they would be combined. The way that I'm showing it here is actually a reference to old wood and metal type, okay, because the F and the L may have been literally separate pieces of wood. Okay. And then a ligature was actually a separate piece of wood. Okay. With that F and L combined. All right. The typesetters would use to physically replace those two separate characters. So it was a little bit of an efficiency thing. But also it would sort of save space. Right. Sometimes having that physical space, that physical width of wood added too much space to the line. They could sort of tighten up the word, tighten up the spacing by replacing it with a ligature. So it's very practical in terms of, traditional typesetting, the way that we're thinking of it there. When we're thinking about digital typesetting, okay, so this is anything on screen, right? This could be a website. This could be any kind of on-screen graphics. Any place where you're sort of setting type. Type designers, the people who are drawing the letter forms are absolutely still drawing ligatures, but it's more so these days about sort of aesthetic. We're not so concerned, especially on screen, right, about pixel real estate as much, okay? Because we could just sort of shrink the point size. We could make other accommodations rather than having to force a ligature in there. And so are they still in use? Yes. A lot of times they are used for aesthetic purposes. And a lot of fonts that you'll see actually have those hard coded in. So you would actually have to go in and turn off ligatures. Sometimes it just makes more sense to have an F and a T connect. So you don't have that visual disruption of that overhang of the F hitting the T. Lots of different reasons to use ligatures or not to use them. But are they still around? You bet.
Next question.
Talalik Lopez Waterman in Wilmington asking, can a brand own a font? Can they keep others from using it?
Ooh, okay. So can they own a font? Yes. Can they prevent others from using it? This is a tricky question because I think it sort of opens a larger door, a larger conversation about can we prevent anyone on the internet from using anything? Right. So there's lots of conversations now about intellectual property when we think about NFTs and image usage and copyright. This is a much larger conversation. What I see a lot of brands doing, IBM is a fantastic example, and also the Cooper Hewitt Museum as well, also a great example. They will commission type design foundries or design studios to create a custom font or a custom typeface for them, right? They will use it for their brand and then they'll share it out. They'll make it open source. So you may have seen IBM Plex. That's pretty common in Google's system, right? Pretty accessible there. So that was created for IBM. So they own that IP, but they're making it open source so others can use it, right?
And it saves them a lot of money in the long run, right? Because if you're having to pay if you have to license all of those fonts.
Absolutely. Yeah. So fonts have license agreements, just like images and so many other things do, right? And so for those that don't know, for you to be able to use a font, first you must purchase it. But when you are purchasing, you have to purchase a number of licenses. And that's based on desktops and sometimes based on views as well, number of views. And so sort of
so if you have a company with 100,000 people and technically you should be buying that font for every one of them, it becomes relatively inexpensive to hire someone to build, say, I want something that looks a lot like I have a lot of brands I work with that have a lot of their own fonts because they're every year they actually get a new one and they're slowly building up a couple. These are big companies. So a couple new ones that they can use, but that means that they pay. And how much does it usually cost if someone wants to commission a font? How much would you, I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot. How much would somebody charge if someone said, I need you to build a font for me?
Oh my goodness. Okay. That's another one where I say it depends because it's going to depend on the foundry that does it. For example, if you are wanting to build a house and you want Jeannie Gang, a really famous architect, to design this house for you, you're going to pay a premium. But if you want a local architecture firm to do it, that number is going to be different, right? And so I think that number is really dependent on the foundry that you work with.
What's the range? of cost?
Oh my gosh. Hard to say. You could easily do tens of thousands.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Next question.
Tony Fugua from Indianola asking, how has generative AI began to affect typography?
This is new territory for me, honestly. What I'm seeing, perhaps not so much from AI, but what I'm beginning to see in different kinds of programming language like P5, people using Python and Drawbot and processing, they're doing a lot of what's called generative typography, where the designer is sort of putting in some commands, essentially, right? Where they're wanting the type to do this, look this way, be this color, right? They're sort of setting those basic parameters, and then they're letting the machine run it, right? So that in itself, that sort of study is generative typography. There's always a human on one end, right, creating those parameters, and then the machine is sort of spitting that out. But in terms of, gosh, I'm trying to think of any examples where.
I had never thought of that. I just had never thought of that. So you are they spitting out lots of font options, like when you put in the parameters?
So let's see. A fun example that I can think of is there's one. It's called. Any of you that are familiar with code, you may be familiar with the key command font face, where you're sort of choosing the font for your website. That HTML language. There's a website, I think it's called Font Face, where it actually activates your camera. And you can make expressions with your face, and you are actually, based on your expressions, the proportions of your face, you're changing the parameters of the type. Okay, so the type will be fatter or thinner, or be taller or shorter, which is bonkers, I know. And then you can actually export it and use it. Like export it, download it, and use it. And it is literally your face. And so there's some sort of fun things out there like that happening. I have a colleague of mine, Catherine Plone, is doing a lot of really interesting stuff in terms of generative ecological type, where she'll input a value, not like weight or width or height, but sort of like resiliency or growth. Right. And so she's building examples of type and information graphics that if you turn the growth up really high, the lines, the stroke weights are going to sort of permeate the screen sort of faster and do some interesting things. So I'm speaking a little bit vague here because it's really difficult to describe without visualizing. Apologies, podcast only listeners. But it's sort of out there, but it's still sort of in partnership with a user, with a creator, right? Yeah. I am not so familiar with type and AI. We'll see what's to come.
That's interesting. Next question.
Yeah.
Last question.
Kyle Hammond from Chicago, Illinois has a question. What are your thoughts on typography as it relates to 3D? Have you worked with 3D fonts?
Yes. So again, applicable, depending, applicable upon the situation, right? So 3D fonts can be really wonderful, but again, it's like, what is that 3D adding to it? Right? What is the three-dimensionally adding to it? The same way, kind of in reference to that animation question. Don't just do it because it's flashy and cool, right? Like there's got to be some kind of purpose. And so I'm sort of conjuring up an image perhaps that Apple has used in the past, where maybe the Apple TV, right? Like the big T and the big V perhaps have like rotated in space, right? And the lighting is like really controlled. They're using something like Cinema 4D or Maya, whatever, to sort of make this really like monolithic impact, right? Like they're about to announce something, or maybe like a big X or a big 9 or whatever, right? And so the impact there is really important. Oh my goodness, Courtney brings up a Life of Brian movie poster that he is showcasing on screen. Great movie, by the way. A really classic example too of sort of like hand-drawn 3D type. Terry Gilliam, very famous for his collage work, right? And sort of his sort of whole aesthetic of Monty Python, right? Like the reason that he's doing that they're doing that, creating that like really 3D Life of Brian type treatment is because it's supposed to be something monolithic. We're looking up at it, right? Which has its religious connotations as well, okay? But it feels really important. It's carved out of stone. It's really heavy, right? So it's not just that it's 3D, but there's lots of other things there happening to kind of communicate that mood, okay? So 3D type, love it. Why are you doing it? Right? What's the purpose? What's the intent? What's the sort of emotion that you're trying to communicate? I think that's probably the most important thing to think about. Yeah.
Kelcey, so great. Like really great hour. Really fun. That went by really fast.
It did go by so fast.
And we were so deep. There's so many questions. We might have to try to get you to come back. Are you willing to come back and hang out with us again?
Yeah, I love that. There were so many good questions. This was a lot of fun for me too. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, because we had another, I don't know, 15 or 20 questions that are just waiting to jump in. So,
my goodness. I probably spoke too much.
No, you didn't at all.
On too long.
It was perfect. And we just need to have you come back. That's all. We have more questions. And so thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was really great. I loved seeing all the faces here, all the super good questions. So thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you.
To come back.
Thanks to the producers for all the great questions. We had hundreds of people sitting there watching, posting their questions in. We really appreciate all of your work there. We can't do the show without the questions. Thanks to the panelists for all the great answers. We traveled 60,000 miles today. That's 97,000 kilometers and 477 million bananas for scale. Also, thank you to the incredible team on the back end. There's a small village that lights up every morning. We talk about this all the time. They're planning, they're working with people, they're prepping the speakers, they're figuring out the code that makes this whole thing run. They're developing it all, and then there's all the people that are running the show every day. And we just really appreciate your contribution. Really, really great work. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. That was so great. This is Kelcey. This is like our little whisper rooms.
Oh my gosh!
We're just talking underneath. We're just kind of talking underneath the text.
Okay. Yeah.
That was really good.
Don't forget we have a show workshop tonight. PM.
Show 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock.
Next time, kerning pairs.
Ooh.
We can do a whole second hour on I think we can do a whole second hour on kerning. Just kerning.
Two kerns up there.
Choose these typefaces for our credits here.
Yeah, I could. They were so small, I couldn't see them. Okay, I'll have to look.
Thanks, Kelcey.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
Really great to have you. All right, thanks.
Bye.